and they have a right to exert themselves in the civic sphere, and to do so confidently, because we're the people, and therefore in relationship to politicians, political parties, etc., they're there to serve us.
Welcome to The Political Independent, your weekly home for a refreshingly nonpartisan take on the news, as well as thought-provoking discussions on how to improve the American political process. Now here is your host, Gregory Anderson.
Welcome, my friends, my fellow independents, to a special episode of the podcast. Joining me today for a conversation is June Kless. She is a wife, mother, an independent voter, a community college educator, and a civics education activist. She helped found that organization I've been hinting at over the last couple episodes that I was going to have them on, Compassionate America. I brought her on to explain what Compassionate America is all about. I'm always in favor of bringing on organizations, doing reviews of YouTube channels, podcasts that I think that are doing a really good job, that are going to be helpful in our overall mission here on this podcast to help find more pragmatic solutions, trying to bring this country together and build this independent movement. So without further ado, here is my conversation with June Kless. Joining me now is June Kless from Compassion America. June, thanks for joining me on the podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So before we get into the details of what Compassion America is all about, I would like to give the listeners some background information on you. So what made you get into, political activism? What kind of sparked your interest in the field?
Sure. So I grew up in a pretty political family. My parents and other family members were very committed to their political views. And I also grew up with a sense of duty to country. A lot of World War II vets in my family. And I also had a great-grandmother who was a suffragette. So she maintained active role within her party and at the local level, that is. And I just saw that role model to me throughout my life. And I pursued, that passion for political matters and history by becoming a social studies teacher, at least by training. I didn't work full-time in that field. But then I went on and I became a historian. And I teach at a small community college in Michigan. So for me, it's a lifelong pursuit of civics education, basically. For me, it's about promoting the awareness in the general public that, we the people are in charge of our republic. And, as an educator, I'm not interested in telling people what to think, politically, but I want them to understand how to think, right? And think critically and, engage as they choose their out, politically. And so I think that's partially, what is in my background. It's in my blood. And when things started to change recently in the Republic, I became very concerned and said I better put my money where my mouth is in terms of all this talk about civics and, getting out there and doing your duty as a citizen, and do something about what distressed me about the State of the Union.
What led you to becoming an independent? I know it's we're a big faction here in the United States, even though we're not necessarily represented in the both the Republican and the Democratic Party. We are a pretty big faction and tend to decide elections on occasion. So I'm just curious, because I know we all have our own story. I told mine a couple episodes ago, so I was just kind of curious what yours was.
Sure. Well, as I said, I grew up in a very political family, and they were kind of, I guess, best described as Reagan-era conservatives. And I was raised with that value system and that mindset. But as the years went on, and I heard things about, like, compassionate conservatism and that kind of phrase that came out in the 1990s. I thought, well, that's what direction I want to see the party go in, right? Because, as a historian and social, scientist, I'm interested in all these matters, but I just couldn't see the direction that the party was going in at that time. Balancing with what I understood of the perspective of the compassionate conservative. And as time went on, I just couldn't continue to consider myself a Republican. That didn't necessarily mean I didn't still vote for Republican candidates, because I realized little by little that I was an independent. And so I, focus on the candidate and not much on party.
I'm curious. Normally, independents do receive a lot of flack, just for, I guess, somewhat either being in the middle or just not choosing a side. Did you face any type of, I guess, flack whenever you kind of fully decided that, hey, you were an independent?
I mean, at a personal level, it's only ever come up once. And in college, I remember having this discussion with somebody who was on the left and somebody who was on the right. And I always considered myself more of a moderate, even by then. In my, at that point in my life, as I migrated away from my political party roots, let's say. And that they got very firm about the idea that there's no way I could believe in anything if I'm a moderate. You can't have any principles. You can't have this if you don't have that party platform, guiding your way. And I just said, I can think for myself, thanks. So, yeah. So at a personal level, no. But I do believe that the fact that, Compassion America is truly trying to reach out to people from all different aspects of the political spectrum. And I mean, mind you, it's harder to reach out to some these days than others, I think. But there's not been pushback so much on that, but there's been confusion. Like, well, who are you for? And just people wanting that specific thing. And it's like, well, I'm not going to give you that, because we expect candidates to come to us to endorse us, not the opposite.
I had to ask that question. As an independent, I'm sure you've likely got this as well. People on both the left and right think that independents don't have a hill to die on, which isn't totally accurate. We do. We do have hills to die on. We have our own pet peeve issues. They just happen to be different from yours. And it's also more difficult to play the whataboutism game with an independent. So I think that's also a thing that partisans take issues with. So, shifting gears, I want to know, so what inspired you talked about your beginning as an independent, how you got into political activism. What sort of inspired the creation of Compassion America? Where did the idea come from?
Sure. Well, a lot of it came from my training as an educator and a historian. It led me to assess where we were at in our political culture history. And looking back on the past in terms of how things change in our political culture and the times when it's most effective to make political culture change. As I watched what was unfolding in the country and realized that this is a direction that personally I just could not get behind. I started thinking more philosophically, where can we go with where we are right now? The good, the bad, and the ugly. And I started journaling. I started writing my ideas down and talking with my family and friends. And as I started to explore my own thinking more and listening to them about what was bothering them about the State of the Union, plus just being in the line of work that I'm in and observing the frustrations of everyday people, and realized that there was an opportunity for us to step out a little bit into the fray, as Tricia, another one on Compassion America, says, but to get out there and propose to the American people a different way of thinking about themselves in relationship to government. Because a lot of people feel very, just that they don't have power, that they're at the whims of the two parties, that that the government is not, especially at the federal level, it is so big and impersonal, and they just feel disconnected. And we wanted to put together then our thoughts to reflect this idea that there are compassionate people all throughout American society, and that we all are trying to do the best we can do to live our lives and contribute to the world in ways that are meaningful, and that people are decent, overall. And most people want to assume other people are decent too. And then you look at this in relationship to the political culture we're at right now, and it was just this disconnect. And so that's where it all kind of coalesced. And I started taking my notes and those types of things and putting these ideas into a document. And that's kind of how it all came about, and in relationship to the initial emotional drive behind it. I talked with friends, I talked with family, and then little by little we said, let's give people hope. Let's put this out there. Let's have them see that there's another way forward. And this was back in November when I started really, drafting this thing, and then sharing it and vetting it with other academics and just average people, those kinds of things. And then that led to this idea of the organization, right, of Compassion America, that we're going to get out there and engage with this philosophy that we're calling compassionate governance ideology.
Can you give the listeners just a short summary of the Declaration of Mission?
Sure thing. The Declaration of Mission is a document that is designed to speak to the American people in a way that empowers them to remember that they're we the people, and they have a right to exert themselves in the civic sphere, and to do so confidently, because we're the people, and therefore in relationship to politicians, political parties, etc., they're there to serve us, not, the other way around, which it sometimes feels like. And the goal of the document is to be a we the people's document that says enough is enough with this combative governance, where it's, locking horns. The processes of the republic are, kind of almost locked in, especially at the federal level. And to move past that, to say we have a right to insist that our politicians govern compassionately. And that there's a petition to Congress that can go out, but also to challenge candidates, those kinds of things with this document. And talk to people, talk to family, friends, and share the word about it and have them challenge candidates.
So what are, I would say, the primary goals of Compassionate American? Like, what are you hoping to achieve?
Right. So I apologize if that answer was a little convoluted to get to where I'm going here, but
oh, no problem at all.
But ultimately, we like I said, we kind of were birthed through this document, right? And as we started to think about strategy, like how do you get this, out there? We had to think about, well, to whom are we getting it to? And, is there a specific way we want to go about doing it? And that took us to social media, which I think I've mentioned this to you in other conversations. It's not my favorite place to be, but I've been learning a lot, and I got very hopeful that, this message had essentially already a built-in audience based on what I was seeing on Twitter. So we started talking. We said, let's start proposing this to candidates. We built a website, all those kinds of things, and let's make it a challenge, right? So the group that we now call Compassion America set upon that initial strategy. And that continues. We are challenging candidates to sign the Declaration of Mission, pledge kind of thing. And I think we're calling it the Compassion America Pledge. And if they do, then we highlight them through our page, that this is a person who is willing to serve using compassionate governance ideology as expressed in the Declaration of Mission. And, we highlight and, just sort of keep that concept in front of people on our social media page, so that also they'll be thinking about, looking at the document themselves and maybe having conversations, those kinds of things. So we've hosted some webinars, those kinds of things. But that then cycled back on this concept of how do we promote civics awareness and civics education through this, which, like I said earlier, is a passion of mine. And so that's become another element of our work, doing civics-based webinar programming.
So how can others join Compassion America? How can they join the movement?
Sure. And, we're not a structured kind of thing in a very strict way or anything like that. We don't have membership and, whatnot. And we are, we're not a nonprofit. We also do not accept any donations or, anything like that. It's just us as individuals coming together. We don't represent anybody but ourselves, in doing this work. And so we just invite folks who are interested to outreach to us at our email, which is compassionateamerica76@gmail.com. And if you're a political candidate, you can take the pledge by going to compassionateamerica.org. And on there's the candidate challenge, and they can sign the candidate challenge. Well, just basically from there, we would get in touch with folks, and people can join us at our core team meetings, which we have regularly. If they're interested in thinking about how they can get involved in this. I think it's worth saying, because I'm not sure I highlighted this enough earlier, but a lot of this is about, trying to inspire people to use their civic voice, right? The Declaration of Mission is written in such a way that it's meant to be a personal call to anyone in America, right? That as part of that body politic in America, and we the people in specific, we have that right to assert our voices and to expect that our elected employees follow not only, the Constitution, but also the concept of compassionate governance ideology.
All right, June, it was a pleasure having you on, and we look to having you on again sometime soon.
Thank you very much. I'll be happy to come back, and appreciate what you're doing.
That is it for this episode of The Political Independent. I'd like to thank June for coming on the podcast. I truly appreciate it. If you'd like to hear more about Compassionate America, do so at compassionateamerica.org. We will leave a link in the show notes. You can also look up Compassionate America on Twitter to follow them. That will also be in the show notes, and I will see you next week, my friends.